Hi, everyone. We're so excited that you could join us today. We are kickstarting our new podcast called HR Unplugged. This is an opportunity for us to talk about how, like most companies, corporate evolution of HR is happening very, very rapidly. And so it's our opportunity to talk about how we're doing things at Maximus, how we're staying, on the cutting edge, and what we're doing to really empower our employees and our leaders to get us where we need to be. So thank you so much for joining us. Today, our first guest is Rebecca Kenawell. Rebecca and I have been here at Maximus together for 4 years, although she has a much longer career than that here. I consider her part of my dynamic duo. The two of us are complete opposites and yet complete complements of one another. And so I couldn't be more happy to start with her. And so, Rebecca, let me kick it off with the first question. How are you seeing employee engagement post-pandemic?
So that's a really interesting question. I think during the pandemic, we saw a lot of employers offer flexibility for the first time for many of their staff. A lot of our employees got to work from home for the first time. And so, employees see that that's a reality, that employers can make it happen. And so I think post-pandemic, they're really looking for this personalized approach. They're looking for something that really focuses on their well-being and kind of meeting them where they're at. Some of the things that we've seen, I think, through our employee engagement survey and some of the other interactions that we've had with staff is that when you focus on well-being, you focus on providing flexibility, they really respond positively to that. So I think those are certainly some areas that we've tried to lean in on. I think the other area that has been interesting to see is the pivot in how employers are thinking about employee benefits. So you think about, you traditionally think about it around healthcare, medical benefits, those sorts of things. But a lot of employers and employees are looking for things that provide things like financial well-being and helping them grow professionally, furthering their education. So it's thinking a little bit less traditionally and a little bit more flexibly about the future.
It's interesting you say that because I agree with you. And I think that even if you think about mental health, right, like mental health became, if you think pre-pandemic, it was all about like every company just had an EAP service. And EAP it's fantastic, but it's one size fits all. And now, like post-pandemic, it's sort of like a library of services that most companies are offering. Like I'm really proud of our mental health, offerings. And so I think you're exactly right. We've had to really expand everything we're offering people to really keep them engaged.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, and we offer Headspace now, which is something that's been new and creative and not something we probably would have really thought of ahead of the pandemic. And not everybody uses it, but for those that have a need or are interested in it, it's there and they really value it.
Yeah, that's great. So what do you think are the biggest things that we're doing today that are really helping people stay engaged?
So I kind of go back a little bit to the first question. We've continued to offer flexible work arrangements where we can. We can't do it everywhere. Some of our programs certainly require people to work on site. But I think where we have the ability to do that, it's very valued by our staff. And so we're continuing to lean in on that as much as we can. I think for those places where employees do have to go in, it's really about saying, okay, how can we create an environment that puts the employee first? We know we may not be able to let you work from home, but what can we do while you're here to really make this a positive experience for you? I think those have been two big ones. The other one is our employee value proposition. And this is one I'm proud of. I think the rest of the organization is really proud of. It's led by our Total Rewards team, but it's really an effort that comes together through all of the HR leadership team, where we look at what are the things that we're offering employees, what are some of the things that are out there in the marketplace that we could offer, and what are we hearing from our people? And the Total Rewards team has done a really fantastic job of putting together what I like to think of as a wish list. Things we'd like to offer to our staff that we have put on the roadmap. And we visit that with leadership a couple times a year to prioritize that and to figure out where can we find the funding and at what pace can we roll some of these things out. And so it's been exciting to be a part of it. And I think our employees have very much appreciated some of the programs that we've pushed out through that effort. A couple that we've done recently that have been really well received is our paid family leave which we didn't do before, as well as bringing back tuition reimbursement.
That's great. It's funny. I did a social post recently on Maximus had won an award from Virtual Vocations about our work from home program. And that post actually got like 10,000 impressions or something like that, which just shows it's not just our employees, but employees around the globe who are continuing to look for support to work remote. And so it's amazing to me how many companies have just kind of pivoted and said, nope, you're coming in. And really without a basis in research. I think there is a lot of people are like, you know what, collaboration and innovation work better in person. But there's not actually a lot of research. And when there is research, there's conflicting research on it. I do think there's value in spending time together, but I also think respecting people and their lives and giving them the ability to work remote has been a game changer for us. It's made us competitive in the market in a way that I don't think we would have been pre-pandemic. And so.
Absolutely.
So it does seem like burnout is a big reason that companies are seeing departure today. One of the downsides, I think, of working from home is there's no start and stop to the day like there used to be. Like you used to consider your commute like that time where you would decompress and you would go home and go, oh, okay, I'm done with work. And occasionally you'd get interrupted on the nights and weekends, but for the most part, you could really separate. And now it feels like you're always on. You're always on with work, always on with family. And so that burnout is definitely happening. And so what are you seeing? Are you seeing burnout on the rise at Maximus? Are there things that you would recommend we take a look at?
So I think burnout's one of those things that's always been there. I think it probably looks and feels different now than maybe it did 5 or 10 years ago. But you're right, that kind of traditional 9 to 5 that people are used to, it's kind of faded. It's very blurry, with flexibility, with being able to work from home and not having that commute. People sign on when it makes sense for them and when it makes sense for the organization. And so you don't have that clear end to your day, which is tough. And it does make it a lot more tempting for people to just kind of keep going and respond to that last email that came in, or make sure that you're available for that person in another time zone. And while that's valued, like from a human perspective, you have to have that balance. So I think the burnout has probably positioned itself a little bit differently than it used to. I think the other piece that may play into this a little bit is, layoffs have been a big news headline story lately. And I think you see some employees saying, okay, I just need to work longer hours. I need to do more. I need to show my value to the company so that I'm not at risk. And I think a lot of those things honestly can be mitigated if managers and employees are just talking and saying, okay, let's reset on the expectation. What do I expect of you from kind of a working hours perspective? When is it okay to push back on a meeting that might be outside of normal boundary hours? And how does your role kind of fit into where we're headed with an organization so that uncertainty can start to be tamped down a little bit?
I think that's great. And I agree, especially, for those of us who have children create that boundary no matter what, right? Like they're not going to tolerate, endless amounts of work. My oldest daughter is 13 and she still appears behind my head in my office window going at certain times with her hands on the window, like, come out, I need you. And so it's funny how, I do think that kids create that for us in some ways. And, if you don't have kids, I think you still have to find the things that are important to you, whether it's pets or plants or things that need you. Parents, we have an aging parental, environment as well. And so I think all of those things mean you have to find that boundary and that balance. And I think some people are really good at finding it. And even if that means they log in and out multiple times a day, and their workday might start at 6 a.m. and go till 10 at night, but they take the chunks and the bumps and the breaks that they need in the middle to live their life. I think that's the new world. And I think the sooner people find that rhythm, I think the happier they're going to be and the less burnt out they're going to feel. So,
agreed.
What have you? I know you and your team, and actually a pretty big team, have been focused on our policies this year. And so, what have you done to kind of pivot our approach to policies at Maximus? And how are we treating them so that they're a little less rigid, a little less burdensome? How are you looking at it?
Yeah. So it all kind of I take a step back and say, okay, as a company, over the last couple of years, we've been really focused on redefining our values and thinking about how do those values show up in our culture. And as we've gone through that process, it's been pretty clear. Some of our policies are kind of grounded in pretty strong governance. They're not exactly employee friendly. And so it's given us a really great opportunity to do what we're calling this policy transformation project. And so through that, we've actually pulled in a cross-functional team of primarily HR business partners, but also individuals within the business to say, help us figure out how to, kind of create policies that are going to work for the business, work for you and your teams, but also grounded in our values, grounded in being kind of employee-centric and employee-forward. And so it's been an exciting journey to be a part of. I think, for this group, they've really pushed the envelope in terms of what can we do? How can we set things up so that we're, conveying who we are as a company, how we want employees to kind of show up and engage at work. And to your point, it's kind of providing guardrails. It's not very strict parameters that say you must do this, you cannot do this. It's more, this is the spirit of what we intended. Here's how we want you to show up at work. But it gives managers some flexibility to say, okay, I've got a unique situation. What do I do? You can actually respond to it in a way that is, responsive to the employee and the situation, and it doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all.
And I'm probably either to blame or at least partially to blame for our new approach, but I have this weird way of thinking about it. I think of policies the same way I think of performance, where you have a bell curve, like with a normal distribution. And so that normal distribution, if you're smart, right, like 92 or 94% fall in like the main part of the curve. Yeah. And yet a lot of companies build policies to try and encapsulate 100% of the curve because they're so afraid of the people who are like those lower performers who are violating the policy, and they just don't want to have to deal with that without saying, well, the policy says you can't. And so, but the problem that creates is that then your higher performers, the ones who are really delivering, get brought into that same policy. And I think sometimes you're like, okay, I can only have control in my operating environment if 100% of the employees fall under this policy. But it absolutely creates the worst employment experience for the bulk of your workforce. And so instead I look at it and I tend to think of policies as needing to, whether it's my bell curve or the 80-20 rule, sort of, you want to capture 80% of the scenarios, but you don't really want to have it so locked down that you're not flexible. And more importantly, you don't want to build your policies around your worst employees. You want to build them around your best employees. And so I'm super grateful for the work that you and the team are doing to really help us pivot there.
And that's where that accountability value comes in, right? We design the policies around our best employees. And if you're not meeting them, then we hold you accountable for it.
That's right. That's why having accountability as a value is an important one. So, have you seen employees or even more importantly, managers struggle with trying to figure out how to live in this 80-20 world where it's not all black and white?
We thought that managers were going to struggle with it. Historically, as a company, we've always had a level of rigidity that provided very clear guidelines to say you do this in this situation, and it took some of the guesswork out of the process. Didn't make it personable, but it made it very clear. Managers have actually responded pretty positively to this. I think, they've felt like their hands have been tied for a long time, and trying to figure out how to work around policies is exhausting. And so this new approach has really given them a lot more opportunity. But I will say on the flip side, we have had to provide some clearer guidance to the HR community. Because at the end of the day, it's important that our policies are maintained and interpreted in somewhat of a consistent level. And so we've put together what we call the HR reference guide. And it's a tool, it's not prescriptive, but it's a tool that provides HR some guidance on, typically how would you navigate through this policy or this process. But more importantly, it provides some prompting questions to say, okay, if you're experiencing something unusual with this policy, here's some questions to think through or have a conversation with your business partner about that will help you figure out what's the right way to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I do think, too, the managers that are not managing things, like that want that kind of clarity, probably aren't the best managers to begin with, right? Like they want the easy button where they can just depend on that policy. It means they're not really thinking about the employee, the situation, and really how to think through it, right? Like in a big fashion. All right. So next question for you. Do you feel like the policy work and the engagement work you're doing are directionally aligned?
I sure hope so. That's the intention. That's the intention, right?
If they're not, we're totally doing it wrong.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, the intention is really to drive employee engagement, and the employee policy transformation is one of the enablers that's going to help us get there.
That's great. And so, all right, do you have any parting thoughts for us, things that you think the world should know, as we make corporate more effective and corporate HR more effective? Any kind of parting thoughts or ideas from the mind of Rebecca Kenawell?
I mean, I think it's really important that we just continue to listen and stay focused on what we're hearing from our employees and our managers, and that we are able to respond to what we're hearing. Our global employee engagement results are coming out very soon, and so we're all very anxious to see what that's going to tell us, and then we can use that information to figure out where do we go from here.
One of my favorite things about our employee engagement survey is that we do action planning at the grassroots level. So every manager who has 5 people or more has to build an action plan off of it. And so, it'll be interesting to see if we're seeing anxiety around sort of the policy evolutions come out through that, but I don't think we will. So. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I love spending time with you. You know that. And I'm so grateful you're here with us at Maximus. So.
Thank you. This was wonderful. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks.